Hey everybody, chapter 11. Chapter 10 was the rabid dog chapter. My shirt in the picture, Atticus and his gun shooting the rabid dog. Chapter 11 is written in a similar manner. The kids feel one way about something, and then by the end, their perspective is changed. They're able to see that situation a little bit differently. You meet my second favorite character in this whole book in chapter 11. My first favorite character by far is Atticus, of course. He is the quintessential good human, gives you the lesson on what you need to do in all situations. But my second favorite character, we only really see in this chapter. She's a one chapter character, and we'll talk about that at the end. But we meet Mrs. DeBose. Here we go. Chapter 11. When we were small, Jem and I confined our activities to the southern neighborhood. But when I was well into the second grade at school and tormenting Boo Radley became passé, old school, routine, the business section of Macomb drew us frequently up the street past the real property of Mrs. Henry Lafayette DeBose. It was impossible to go to town without passing by her house, unless we wished to walk a mile out of the way. Previous minor encounters with her left me with no desire for more, but Jem said I had to grow up sometime. Mrs. DeBose lived alone except for a Negro girl in constant attendance, 2 doors up the street from us in a house with steep front steps and a dog trot hall. She was very old. She spent most of each day in bed and the rest of it in a wheelchair. It was rumored that she kept a CSA pistol concealed among her numerous shawls and wraps. So, pause. Kids to go to town and hang out downtown, they have to go past her house. She's this old woman. They sits on her porch in old lady wraps and old lady blankets, and they believe that she has a pistol in those old lady blankets that she can shoot them with at any point in time. More on Mrs. DeBose. Jem and I hated her. If she was on the porch when we passed by, we would be raked by her wrathful gaze, subjected to ruthless interrogation regarding our behavior, and given a melancholy prediction on what we would amount to when we grew up, which was always nothing. We had long ago given up the idea of walking past her house on the opposite side of the street. That only made her raise her voice and let the whole neighborhood in on it. So when they would walk by her house, she would yell at them and call them awful names. And so they're like, okay, we'll walk on the other side of the street. So then she would just yell louder. Oh, Mrs. DeBose. We could do nothing to please her. If I said as sunnily as I could, hey, Mrs. DeBose, I would receive for an answer, don't you say hey to me, you ugly girl. You say good afternoon, Mrs. DeBose. She was vicious. Once she heard Jem refer to our father as Atticus, and her reaction was apoplectic. Besides being the sassiest, most disrespectful mutts who ever passed her way, we were told that it was quite a pity our father had not remarried after our mother's death. A lovelier lady than our mother never lived, she said, and it was heartbreaking the way Atticus Finch let her children run wild. I did not remember our mother, but Jem did. He would tell me about her sometimes, and he went livid when Mrs. DeBose shot us this message. Jem, having survived Boo Radley, a mad dog, and other terrors, had concluded that it was cowardly to stop at Miss Rachel's front steps and wait, and had decreed we must run as far as the post office corner each evening to meet Atticus coming from work. Countless evenings, Atticus would find Jem furious at something Mrs. DeBose had said when we went by. Easy does it, son, Atticus would say. She's an old lady. She's ill. You just hold your head high and be a gentleman. Whatever she says to you, it's your job not to let her make you mad. Jem would say she must not be very sick. She hollered so. When the 3 of us came to her house, Atticus would sweep off his hat, wave gallantly to her, and say, "Good evening, Mrs. DeBose. You look like a picture this evening." I never heard Atticus say like a picture of what. He would tell her the courthouse news and would say he hoped with all of his heart she'd have a good day tomorrow. He would return his hat to his head, swing me on his shoulders in her very presence, and we would go home in the twilight. It was times like these when I thought my father, who hated guns, had never been to any wars, was the bravest man who ever lived. Pause. Why does she think that? Why is that bravery? Because she's afraid that Mrs. DeBose is going to kill them. to shoot them. This sick old lady who shouts obscenities and yells at them. She is terrified of her. And because Atticus is kind and gallant and thoughtful and courteous to her, polite, she's like, Atticus is the bravest man ever. This is worse than guns and wars and battles. Here we go. Here's the story now. The day after Jim's 12th birthday, his money was burning up his pockets. He wanted to spend it. So we went to town in the early afternoon. Jim thought he had enough to buy a miniature steam engine for himself and a twirling baton for me. Pause. What a good brother. His birthday money, he's going to buy his little sister a gift. Okay. I had long had my eye on that twirling baton. It was at VJ Elmore's and it was bedeckled with sequins and tinsel. It cost 17 cents. It was then my burning ambition to grow up and twirl with the Macomb County High School band. Having developed my talent to where I could throw up a stick and almost catch it coming down, I had caused Calpurnia to deny me entrance to the house every time she saw me with a stick in my hand. I felt that I could overcome this defect with a real baton, and I thought it generous of Jem to buy one for me. So Scout is looking up to the high school kids, and she wants to be the twirler in the band. And so she's practicing with a stick all of the time. And Calpurnia is like, no, you're not coming in this house with that stick. You're going to throw it up. Nope. So she's like, oh, I'm going to get a baton. Now I can come in and twirl my baton. This next line, we got to talk about this too. Mrs. DeBose was stationed on her porch when we went by. Stationed sounds like military. Where are you two going this time of day? She shouted. Playing hooky, I suppose. I'll just go up to the principal and tell him. She put her hands on the wheels of her chair and executed a perfect right face. Again, another military reference. It's Saturday, Mrs. DeBose, said Jem. Makes no difference if it's Saturday, she said obscurely. I wonder if your father knows where you are. Mrs. DeBose, we've been going to town by ourselves since we were this high. Jem placed his hand, palm down, about 2 feet above the sidewalk. Don't you lie to me, she yelled. Jeremy Finch, Miss Maudie Atkinson, told me you broke down her scuppernong arbor this morning. She's going to tell your father, and then you'll wish you never saw the light of day. If you aren't sent to the reform school before next week, my name is not DeBose. Jem, who hadn't been near Miss Maudie's scuppernong arbor since last summer, and who knew Miss Maudie wouldn't tell Atticus if he had, issued a general denial. Don't you contradict me, Mrs. DeBose bawled. And you, she pointed an arthritic finger at me. What are you doing in those overalls? You should be in a dress and camisole, young lady. You'll grow up waiting on tables if somebody doesn't change your ways. A Finch waiting on tables at the OK Cafe. Ha! That's like an insult. I was terrified. The OK Cafe was a dim organization on the north side of the square. I grabbed Jem's hand out of fear, but he shook me loose. Come on, Scout, he whispered. Don't pay any attention to her. Just hold your head high and be a gentleman. Look at Jem taking Atticus's instructions and lessons and trying to help his sister. But Mrs. DeBose held on. Not only a Finch waiting on tables, but one in the courthouse lawn for niggers. Jem stiffened. Mrs. DeBose's shot had gone home, and she knew it. Okay, pause. That means that Jem is reacting to this. When she uses that word, and I use it because it's used intentionally, when she uses that word, Jem like, ugh, I don't want to ignore this. And she sees that body language, and she goes in for more. Yes, indeed, she said. What does this world come to when a Finch goes against his raisin? I'll tell you. She put a hand to her mouth. When she drew it away, it trailed with a long silver thread of saliva. Your father is no better than the niggers and trash he works for. Jem was scarlet red. He pulled at his sleeve, and we were following up the sidewalk by a philippic on our family's by a lecture on our family's moral degeneration, the major premise of which was that half the Finches were in the asylum anyway, but if our mother were living, we would have not come to such a state. I wasn't sure what Jem resented most, but I took umbrage at Mrs. DeBose's assessment of the family's mental hygiene. I had become almost accustomed to hearing insults aimed at Atticus, but this was the first time it came from an adult. Except for her remarks about Atticus, Mrs. DeBose's attack was only routine. There was a hint of summer in the air. In the shadows, it was cool, but the sun was warm, which meant good times coming. No school and Dill. So pause right here. Notice Scout's like trying to put this together. Like, yeah, it doesn't bother her as much, right? Kids are always saying bad things about Atticus, and Scout ignores them. She's like, but this is the first time it came from an adult, right? She's like, but it's summer. We don't have school. Dill's gonna be here soon. Whatever. I don't even care. I'm gonna ignore it and move on. They continued. They went to the store. Jem bought a steam engine, and we went by Elmore's for my baton. Jem took no pleasure in his acquisition. He jammed it in his pocket and walked silently beside me toward home. He's still angry. On the way home, I nearly hit Mr. Link D. Sorry, this is funny. On the way home, I nearly hit Mr. Link D's with my baton, who said, "Look out now, Scout." When I missed a toss and we approached Mrs. DeBose's house, my baton was grimy for having picked it up from out of the dirt so many times. She was not on the porch. In later years, I sometimes wondered what made Jem do it. What made him break the bonds of "you just be a gentleman, son," and the phase of self-conscious rectitude he had recently entered. Jem had probably stood as much guff and nonsense about Atticus longing for niggers as had I, and I took it for granted that he kept his temper. He had a naturally tranquil disposition and a slow fuse. At the time, however, I thought the only explanation for what he was that for a few minutes he simply went mad. Jem did was something I would do, as a matter of course, had I not been under Atticus's strict rules, which I assumed included not fighting horrible old ladies. We had just come to her gate when Jem snatched my baton and ran, flailing wildly up the steps into Mrs. DeBose's front yard, forgetting everything Atticus had said, forgetting that she packed a pistol under her shawls, forgetting that if Mrs. DeBose missed, her girl Jessie probably wouldn't. He did not begin to calm down until he had cut the tops off of every camellia flower bush Mrs. DeBose owned, until the ground was littered with green buds and leaves. He bent my baton against his knee, snapped it in two, and threw it down. Jem goes absolutely wild. Sorry, my dog's barking because the mailman's here. That would have been appropriate last chapter. Good boy, Rocky. So Jem takes Scout's baton. Remember, he's silent this whole time. He's thinking about it. He's angry. He grabs Scout's grimy, dirty baton, runs up, thrashes through all of the flowers, bends it, breaks the baton on a knee, and throws it on the ground. By that time, I was shrieking. Jem yanked my hair, said he didn't care, he'd do it again if he got a chance, and if I didn't shut up, he'd pull every hair out of my head. I didn't shut up, and he kicked me. I lost my balance and fell on my face. Jem picked me up roughly, but looked like he was sorry. There was nothing to say. Should have read that one too. Notice Jem's reaction. He's so angry that even when Scout says something, he yanks her hair and he yanks it again and he pushes her down. And then he's like, dang it, I feel bad. And he picks her back up, right? So angry, trying to let those emotions out. We did not choose to meet Atticus coming home that evening. We skulked around the kitchen until Calpurnia threw us out. By some voodoo system, Calpurnia seemed to know all about it. She was less than satisfied. She was a less than satisfactory source of palliation, but she did give Jem a hot biscuit and butter, which he tore in half and shared with me. It tasted like cotton. We went to the living room. I picked up a football magazine and found a picture of Dixie Howell and showed it to Jem and said, "This looks like you." That was the nicest thing I could think to say to him, but it was no help. He sat by the windows, hunched down in a rocking chair, scowling, waiting. Daylight faded. You know that feeling when you're a little kid and you've done something that you're going to get in trouble for, and you're waiting for dad to come home or mom to come home or the adult that's going to really be mad at you. That's what's happening. 2 geological ages later, felt like forever, we heard the soles of Atticus's shoes scrape the front steps. The screen door slammed. There was a pause. Atticus was at the hat rack in the hall, and we heard him call, "Jem?" His voice was like the winter wind. Atticus switched on the ceiling light in the living room and found us there, frozen still. He carried my baton in one hand. Its flimsy yellow tassel trailed on the rug. He held out his other hand. It contained fat camellia buds. "Jem?" he said. Are you responsible for this? Yes, sir. Makes me weepy. Yes, sir. Hold on. Why'd you do it? Jem said softly. She said you lawed for niggers and trash. You did this because she said that? Jem's lips moved, but his yes, sir was inaudible. Son, I have no doubt that you've been annoyed by your contemporaries about me lawing for niggers, as you say, but to do something like this to a sick old lady is inexcusable. I strongly advise you to go down and have a talk with Mrs. DeBose, said Atticus. Come straight home afterward. Jem did not move. Go on, I said. Go on, I said Atticus. I followed Jem out of the living room. Come back here, Atticus said to me. I came back. Atticus picked up the newspaper, the mobile press, and sat down in the rocking chair Jem had vacated. For the life of me, I did not understand how Atticus could sit there in cold blood and read a newspaper when his only son stood an excellent chance of being murdered with a Confederate Army relic pistol. Of course, Jem antagonized me sometimes until I could kill him, but when it came down to it, he was all I had. Atticus did not seem to realize this, or if he did, he didn't care. Couple things to note here. First of all, Scout is like, oh my God, how could a father send his only son to get killed by this woman? Like, this is not okay. And then I love the little protective little sister. Like, I could kill him because he annoyed the bejesus out of me. But when it came down to it, he's my brother, and that's the thing. We don't do that. And she can't figure out why Atticus is making him go down there where she thinks he may very likely get killed. Of course she's not going to kill him. I hated Atticus for that, but when you are in trouble, you become easily tired. Soon I was hiding in his lap and his arms were around me. You're mighty big to be rocked, he said. You don't care what happens to him, I said. You just send him on to get shot at when all he was doing was standing up for you. Atticus pushed my head under his chin. It's not time to worry yet, he said. I never thought Jem would be the one to lose his head over this. I thought I'd have more trouble with you. I said I didn't see why we had to keep our heads anyway, that nobody I knew at school had to keep his head about anything. Scout, said Atticus, when summer comes, you'll have to keep your head about far worse things. It's not fair for you and Jem. I know that. But sometimes we have to make the best of things. And the way we conduct ourselves when the chips are down, all I can say is, when you and Jem are grown, maybe you'll look back on this with some compassion and some feeling that I didn't let you down. This case, Tom Robinson's case, is something that goes to the essence of a man's conscience. Scout, I couldn't go to church and worship God if I didn't try to help that man. Atticus, you must be wrong, I said. How's that? He said. Well, I said, most folks seem to think that they're right and you're wrong. They're certainly entitled to think that, said Atticus, and they're entitled to full respect for their opinions, he finished. But before I can live with other folks, I've got to live with myself. The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. When Jem returned, he found me still in Atticus's lap. Well, son, said Atticus. He set me on my feet, and I made a secret reconnaissance. There it is. He set me on my feet, and I made a secret reconnaissance of Jem. He seemed to be all in one piece, but he had a strange look on his face. Perhaps she had given him a dose of calomel. I cleaned it up for her and said I was sorry, but I ain't, and that I'd work on him every Saturday to try to make him grow back. There's no point in saying you're sorry if you aren't, said Atticus. Jem, she's old and ill. You can't hold her responsible for what she says and does. Of course, I'd rather she'd have said it to me than to either of you, but we can't always have our choices. Jem seemed fascinated by a rose in the carpet. Atticus, he said, she wants me to read to her. Read to her? Yes, sir. She wants me to come over every afternoon after school and Saturdays and read to her out loud for 2 hours. Atticus, do I have to? Certainly. But she wants me to do it for a month. And you'll do it for a month. Jem planted his big toe delicately in the center of the rose and pressed it. Finally, he said, Atticus, it's all right on the sidewalk, but inside, it's all dark and creepy. There's shadows and things on the ceiling. Atticus smiled grimly. That should appeal to your imagination. Just pretend you're inside the Radley house. Okay, we're going to pause right here for a second. One of my other favorite quotes ever is in this chapter when Atticus says, before I can live with other folks, I've got to live with myself. The one thing that it doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. So basically, Atticus is saying, look, like, you have to listen to your own conscience. Like, if everybody says, kind of in a school situation, if everybody says, hey, let's cut Ruiz's class, I want to go down to Burrito Palace or whatever, and you have to make that decision. Is that right for you? Or, what is right for you in terms of this group, right? If this group says it's okay, is that okay with you or is that not? Because the group doesn't have to live by what's going on in your heart, right? It's not you don't get to, your conscience everybody doesn't vote on how you feel about something on the inside. That's the majority rule. They don't get to vote on what you feel. You have to be okay with that. And he's like, I have to be okay with it. If the whole town is saying this, like, they can say whatever they want. I'm not okay with it. So their vote doesn't matter in my heart. It's a great quote. The other one is, Atticus says, there's no point in saying sorry if you aren't. The idea of a sincere apology being meaningful. There's 3 asterisks at the end of this page. It's kind of the middle of the chapter, and we'll get to part 2 next. Chapter 11, part 2 next.